Our top story at this hour. For the last 7 months, Russia has been waging a war against Ukraine, which Moscow calls special military operations. But the last few days have seen the war escalating to a level last seen in February when the war began. The attack on the Crimean bridge and Russian response to it have potentially escalated the war to unprecedented heights. Key Ukrainian cities woke up to multiple explosions on Monday, from Lviv in the west to Kyiv in the north and Dnipro in the east. Russian missile strikes hit crucial infrastructure in cities all over Ukraine. The strikes led to civilian casualties, power outages and loss of critical civilian infrastructure. The nature and extent of the strikes carried echoes of the initial days of the war. Moscow reportedly fired 83 missiles towards Ukraine by midday. The assault amounts to the heaviest bombardment of Ukrainian cities since February this year. Such all-out attacks on Ukrainian territory from all sides were a key feature of the Russian offensive in the early phase of the war. Russia, in the subsequent phases, has focused more on the southern and eastern Ukrainian territories. So what triggered this massive show of force from Moscow? On Saturday, explosions rocked the Crimean bridge, the rail and road bridge built across the Kerch Strait. It connects Crimea with the Russian mainland. Ukraine has so far not claimed responsibility for the attack, but has nonetheless celebrated it. The attack, however, seems to have hurt Putin's prestige. Why? For one, the bridge was inaugurated by the Russian president himself in 2018. In a dramatic event, he himself drove a truck across the bridge. The railroad was also inaugurated by Putin in 2019. Moreover, the bridge is crucial for supply chains for the Russian forces holding ground in Ukraine's south. Calling the Crimean bridge explosions a terrorist attack, the Russian president declared that Monday morning strikes across Ukraine were a due response. Vladimir Putin has warned that there could be similar strikes in the future.
In case of continuing attempts at terrorist attacks on our territory, Russia's responses will be severe and will correspond in scale to the level of threats created for the Russian Federation. No one must doubt it.
The West has condemned the Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities. Kyiv's key Western allies have also pledged more support for Ukraine. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell promptly tweeted, additional military support from the EU is on its way. The G7 group of nations have called an emergency meeting via video conference on Tuesday. Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Twitter that he would address this meeting. For more on this, we're now joined by Fred Ware from Moscow. He is a Russian affairs expert. Mr. Ware, thank you very much for speaking to WION. Now, Putin says the 83 missile strikes across Ukraine were a response to the Crimean bridge blast, which he has described as a terror attack. Zelensky says Russia is a terror state. Many believe after having suffered multiple shock reverses on the battlefield in recent weeks, an increasingly desperate Putin has decided to escalate the conflict. Does this growing desperation mean that Putin could even consider using tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine? Because the world is clearly alarmed at this point.
I don't think we're at any point like that right now. I believe that Russia is completely changing its posture on the war, and there's several wake-up calls they've had. Of course, the Kharkov offensive, other battlefield reverses, and this Crimea bridge explosion. These things have really promoted the hawkish view in Russia, the ultra-nationalists who have been saying all along that Russia needs to get serious and fight this war with all of its energy and all of its resources. and these reverses, these setbacks, have focused minds in Moscow and forced Putin to declare a mobilization and, after the Crimea bridge explosion, to start really hitting Ukrainian infrastructure. All of that dual purpose infrastructure like bridges and electrical stations, because most Ukrainian trains run on electricity, and other like major infrastructure targets that they had so far not been, well, they have been sometimes, but not seriously or systematically attacking. I think all that is going to change now, and that within a couple of days they will change the name of the war from special military operation to something else, and they will move into a much more aggressive stance down the road.
So it's very clear that whatever nomenclature may be used, Putin is going to escalate the war. But isn't Putin isolating himself and his country further and further, given that civilian populations are being targeted? Many civilians have died. Now, even an ally like Beijing is asking Moscow to dial it down. What will it take for Putin to de-escalate this war? Ukraine, of course, says we will not talk to Russians, they're terrorists. The question is, what is the way forward? Are hostilities only going to spiral upwards?
I'm afraid so. I don't take the terrorist talk seriously. They call each other terrorists, but this is war. I mean, somebody blew up the Crimean bridge with a truck bomb. I don't see any principal difference between that and a cruise missile. They're both using the weapons they have in what is an increasingly savage and brutal war, and increasingly both are targeting infrastructure. And I think this will continue. I think that today's barrage of missiles on Ukraine is probably going to be repeated, and the target list will grow and become more comprehensive. I'm afraid that we're looking at.
All right, so you think this is headed only in one direction, and that is something that should worry the entire international community. What ramifications is this escalation going to have? Only time will tell. But Ware, thank you so much for speaking to WION and sharing your perspective with us on that big story of the day.
Thank you.
And earlier, we also spoke to Mykola Nazarov from Kyiv. He is the Director of Research Center for Regional Security in Ukraine.
I see today's attack on Ukraine as a political communication message by President Putin to Russian population to show him and remind him that he is a strong leader and he will reply to any attack on what he called Russian territory, but it's not. So you know that for Russian leadership to be weak is the most dangerous thing. So that's why he need to show himself as a strong leader. But it's not working in Ukraine. I mean that Ukrainian people, government, armed forces will fight for our sovereignty, territorial integrity, and of course we will win.